April 6th, 1945, off the coast of Okinawa in the East China Sea. As dawn breaks over Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet, sailors aboard radar picket destroyers stationed 16 miles from the main fleet scan the horizon, fully aware of the impending threat. Within the Combat Information Center of the USS Lee, radar operators monitor incoming contacts, not just dozens but hundreds. The ship's 5-inch gun crews prepare shells marked with cryptic VT designations, each equipped with miniaturized radio transmitters that would transform naval warfare. The objective is critical to endure Operation Kikusui No. 1, the first of 10 large-scale coordinated Kamikaze assaults. At 0600 hours, the sky becomes filled with aircraft. Through the morning mist, a sound emerges that will characterize the Battle of Okinawa, the drone of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines approaching in waves. Pilots, confined within their cockpits, have no intention of returning. Leading the charge are pilots from the Imperial Japanese Navy Special Attack Units, flying their Zero fighters and Yokosuka D-4 wide-duty dive bombers, which are loaded with 250 kilo bombs, followed by waves of older aircraft repurposed for suicide missions. Among them are specially trained Oka pilots, sealed within rocket-powered flying bombs carried by Mitsubishi G4MB Betty bombers. What unfolds next will showcase the revolutionary effects of American proximity fuse technology and illustrate why the initially devastating Japanese kamikaze tactics would ultimately falter against the most advanced anti-aircraft system ever deployed. The American VT proximity fuse made its debut in the Pacific Theater after 2 years of combat testing, which began with a single historic shot. Developed through an urgent program initiated in 1940 by Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merle Tuve, the proximity fuse was one of the 3 most crucial secret projects of World War II, alongside radar and the atomic bomb. The fuse functioned based on a remarkably straightforward principle, utilizing a miniature radio transmitter receiver that emitted continuous radio waves and measured their return frequency. When the Doppler shift signaled closeness to a target, the fuse would automatically detonate the shell. Gunners would no longer need to calculate precise distances and adjust mechanical timers. The shell would autonomously determine the moment to explode. The technical hurdles had been immense. The components of the fuse, including small glass vacuum tubes produced by Sylvania, were required to endure acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity when fired from a 5-inch gun. The projectile would achieve a speed of 2,600 feet per second while rotating at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. Each component had to operate flawlessly after this violent launch and then function reliably in temperatures ranging from 100 degree to minus 50 degree F. By April 1945, American factories had manufactured over 15 million proximity fuses for naval operations in the Pacific Theater. Production had been spread across various contractors. The Crosley Corporation alone produced 525,913 fuses, accounting for 24% of the total. RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris collaborated with 87 different firms, utilizing 110 factories engaged in various stages of production. This extensive industrial effort ensured that American forces at Okinawa were equipped with the most sophisticated anti-aircraft ammunition ever developed. The United States Navy had increased the allocation of proximity fuses from 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to 75% by 1945. This shift represented an acknowledgement that combat in the Pacific Theater against kamikaze attacks required revolutionary defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship carried thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as their primary defense against suicide attacks. In stark contrast stood the Japanese Kamikaze program, which emerged from desperation. In the wake of devastating losses at the Marianas and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan found itself bereft of most of its seasoned pilots and aircraft carriers. In October 1944, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who commanded the First Air Fleet, suggested the establishment of special attack units, contending that traditional tactics were no longer viable against the overwhelming firepower of the Americans. The Kamikaze represented Japan's effort to convert its remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. The calculations appeared to be in their favor. While conventional assaults had a mere 2% success rate against heavily fortified American vessels, initial kamikaze strikes in the Philippines boasted success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot in a Zero fighter armed with a 250-kilo bomb had the potential to sink a destroyer, sacrificing one life and one outdated aircraft in exchange for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged naval assets. The kamikaze pilots underwent condensed training that prioritized spiritual readiness over flying proficiency. Many had accumulated fewer than 100 hours of flight experience, in stark contrast to the 500 or more hours logged by their predecessors at Pearl Harbor. They were instructed in basic navigation, ship identification, and, most importantly, the final dive approach designed to evade anti-aircraft fire. Prior to their missions, the pilots penned farewell letters, engaged in ceremonial sake toasts, and were presented with samurai swords or rising sun headbands. However, no degree of spiritual preparation could mitigate the technological advancements they were about to face. The Oka suicide weapon epitomized the kamikaze concept. Dubbed Baka, or Fool by American sailors, this piloted bomb was equipped with a 1,200-kilo warhead and propelled by 3 solid fuel rocket motors. With a terminal dive speed of 575 mph, it was engineered to be unstoppable once launched. Nevertheless, its critical vulnerability lay in its range, which barely extended to 10 miles, necessitating that the susceptible Betty bombers deliver them directly into the heart of American defenses. The disparity in defensive strategy was stark. American vessels at Okinawa were arranged in concentric circles of defense, with radar picket destroyers strategically placed to offer early alerts and absorb the initial assaults. Each destroyer was equipped with 12 to 16 5-inch guns capable of firing VT-fused shells, which created overlapping zones of fire. The proximity fuse converted these weapons from mere area denial systems into precise instruments. A 5-inch VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 feet, in contrast to just 20 feet for time-fused shells. More importantly, the fuse removed the intricate calculations necessary for traditional anti-aircraft fire, enabling gunners to engage targets immediately upon detection. The morning of April 6, 1945, would serve as the ultimate test for these systems. Operation Kikusui No. 1 involved 391 naval aircraft and 133 Army planes, of which 215 naval planes and 82 Army planes were kamikazes. This amounted to a total of 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated attack. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of the USS Laffey later likened the incoming kamikaze waves to a swarm of bees heading towards the only flower in a desert. The first wave hit at 0600, with radar operators tracking over 50 aircraft approaching from the north. The picket destroyers commenced firing at maximum range of 12,000 yards using VT-fused shells. The proximity fuses proved to be devastatingly effective against the incoming formations. Each shell that came within lethal range of an aircraft detonated automatically, showering the sky with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells that necessitated precise range calculations, the VT fuses converted near misses into confirmed kills. Within minutes, numerous Japanese aircraft were plunging into the sea, their suicide missions concluded miles away from their intended targets, yet the kamikazes continued their assault. At EO 744, the USS Laffey faced a concentrated attack from 22 aircraft over 80 minutes. The destroyer's gunners discharged 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, successfully destroying 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses enabled Laffey's artillery to target multiple enemies at once, swiftly transitioning between aircraft without the delays associated with fuse adjustments. When kamikaze pilots executed their usual strategy of flying at wave-top altitude to evade radar detection, the VT fuses demonstrated equal efficacy, detonating as the shells neared the ocean's surface and generating clouds of shrapnel that obliterated low-flying aircraft. In spite of this formidable defensive fire, Laffey endured strikes from 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, yet managed to survive. This outcome stands as a testament to both American damage control efforts and the effectiveness of proximity fuses, which had thwarted many more attackers from reaching their objective. The success of the VT fuse was not coincidental. This technology had been covertly tested in combat since January 5, 1943, when the USS Helena discharged the first proximity-fused shells in action near Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochrane, in command of the aft 5-inch battery, successfully shot down a Japanese ICD-3A Val dive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells detonated without requiring direct hits. They merely needed to pass close enough to activate the fuse and disintegrate the aircraft with shrapnel. This singular achievement confirmed 3 years of rigorous development that had surmounted seemingly insurmountable technical obstacles. The fuse comprised approximately 130 electronic components miniaturized to fit within a space smaller than a pint milk bottle, all manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Post-battle analysis during the Okinawa campaign revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-inch shells necessitated an average of 1,162 rounds to eliminate each kamikaze, whereas VT-fused shells reduced this requirement to 310 rounds per kill, representing an almost 4-fold enhancement in effectiveness. Under optimal conditions, the results were even more striking. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie managed to destroy a kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, while defending against a significant kamikaze assault on May 4th, successfully shot down 8 attackers within minutes by utilizing proximity-fused ammunition before ultimately being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of enemy aircraft. The psychological effect of the proximity fuse on Japanese pilots was substantial. Surviving kamikaze pilots who abandoned their missions recounted the harrowing experience of approaching American task forces through what appeared to be solid barriers of exploding shells. The distinctive black clouds of VT explosions manifested with remarkable precision, as if the American gunners possessed the ability to predict the exact position of each aircraft. Japanese tactical doctrine had presumed that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would reduce exposure to anti-aircraft fire. However, the proximity fuse completely undermined these assumptions. Shells that would have missed by 50 feet with traditional fuses now detonated alarmingly close, transforming the final approach into a perilous corridor of meticulously timed explosions. Vice Admiral Mati Ugaki, who was overseeing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, recorded in his diary the increasingly devastating efficacy of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were successfully reaching their targets, in contrast to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. This disparity was largely attributed to what Japanese reports referred to as a new type of anti-aircraft shells that appeared to explode with extraordinary accuracy. Ugaki noted, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe." Individual American sailors operating the 5-inch guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task. Forces aboard the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley during the attack on May 11th, gun crews reported 17 confirmed kills of kamikaze aircraft using proximity-fused ammunition. The gunners devised a method for leading kamikaze aircraft with sustained fire, establishing a wall of VT that the attacking planes had to navigate through. Their gun crews were capable of firing 15 rounds per minute, with each shell containing its own electronic guidance system to seek out targets. During a 52-minute interval, the guns of Hugh W. Hadley successfully destroyed several kamikazes in quick succession with the proximity fuses, ensuring that even shells that passed above or below the swiftly maneuvering aircraft detonated effectively. The account of USS Aaron Ward during the attacks on May 3rd exemplifies the role of the proximity fuse as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft assaulted the destroyer, her 5-inch batteries fired continuously for 52 minutes. The VT-fused shells completely destroyed 6 attackers and severely damaged 5 others, causing them to crash into the sea. Commander William Saunders later stated that without the proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes. The capability to engage targets without the need for precise range finding enabled Aaron Ward's guns to quickly shift focus between multiple threats, a feat that was unachievable with time-fused ammunition. These instances were replicated throughout the entire fleet. During the 10 significant Kikusui operations from April 6th to June 22nd, 1945, Japanese forces launched around 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze assaults. American naval forces, primarily utilizing VT-fused 5-inch shells, managed to destroy hundreds of these attackers before they could reach their intended targets. Data from the Operations Research Group indicated that ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition had a threefold increase in survival rates during concentrated kamikaze attacks compared to those relying mainly on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had revolutionized what could have been a disastrous tactical innovation into a costly yet manageable threat. The differences in technological adaptation became increasingly evident as the campaign advanced. American forces consistently improved their proximity fuse strategies, realizing that VT shells were especially effective when fired in formations that generated overlapping spheres of fragments. Naval vessels began to synchronize their fire to establish these VT boxes through which kamikaze aircraft were compelled to navigate. In contrast, the Japanese could only adapt with tactical modifications, such as dawn assaults, multi-axis strategies, and a combination of conventional and suicide aircraft, none of which could surpass the inherent advantage of shells that detonated at the right moment. The production figures illustrated the narrative of industrial warfare at its peak. By June 1945, American factories were manufacturing 70,000 proximity fuses daily. The entire war effort resulted in over 22 million proximity fuses produced at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency, which is approximately $15 billion in today's dollars. The Crosley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week. The cost of each fuse had decreased from $732 in 1942 to merely $18 by 1945 due to mass production efficiencies. This substantial investment proved to be beneficial when Navy assessments revealed that proximity fuses averted the loss of numerous ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. The Japanese industrial capacity, severely impacted by strategic bombings and resource shortages, could not produce anything comparable. Although Japanese scientists had grasped the concept of the proximity fuse and German reports on Allied special munitions had reached Japan via submarine, they lacked the industrial framework necessary to develop and mass-produce such advanced devices. The vacuum tube technology alone necessitated precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-torn industry could not provide. Furthermore, Japanese radar development, essential for comprehending proximity fuse principles, remained rudimentary compared to American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most sophisticated naval set, operated at wavelengths that rendered miniaturization unfeasible even if manufacturing capacity had been available. The proximity fuse's effectiveness significantly shaped Japanese tactical doctrine during the latter stages of the campaign. By May 1945, Kamikaze pilots received orders to approach American task forces at the highest altitude possible before diving vertically onto their targets, aiming to reduce their exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. Although this tactical modification decreased losses during the approach, it rendered accurate targeting nearly unfeasible. Ships had the ability to maneuver out of the dive path, and the high-altitude approach provided radar operators with additional time to detect incoming aircraft. This attempted solution ultimately proved counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, who commanded the amphibious forces at Okinawa, attributed the success of the invasion to proximity fuses. In a correspondence to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner stated, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have altered the outcome of the Pacific War if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense." His evaluation was supported by Admiral Mark Mitchell, whose flagship, the USS Bunker Hill, survived a catastrophic kamikaze strike on May 11th, in part due to proximity-fused fire that eliminated 3 additional attackers that could have destroyed the damaged carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitch's chief of staff, later reflected on the efficacy of proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. "When I served as chief of staff to Admiral Mitchell, who led the fast carrier task forces, all the 5 in 38 and 5 in 25 ammunition was equipped with VT fuses. As you are aware, those fuses downed enemy aircraft by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties among the fast carriers in the latter half of the war would have been significantly greater." The influence of proximity fuses extended beyond mere numbers. This technology fundamentally transformed the morale dynamics that rendered kamikaze tactics effective. Japanese military doctrine posited that the inevitable death of their pilots would be counterbalanced by a high likelihood of striking enemy vessels. However, when success rates fell below 20% due to the implementation of proximity fuse defenses, this exchange became untenable. Even under the harsh logic of suicide warfare, young Japanese pilots many of whom were university students conscripted into the special attack units, began to realize that their sacrifices would likely yield no significant results. Letters retrieved post-war indicated an increasing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had advanced beyond the assurances given by their commanders. Lieutenant Yukioki, who led the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had experienced considerable success against escort carriers in Lee Gulf, when proximity fuses constituted only 25% of anti-aircraft munitions. By the time of the Okinawa campaign, his successors confronted a drastically altered situation. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka, at the helm of the Thunder God's Corps and armed with Oka flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, with not a single Oka reaching the launch position. American fighters, guided by radar intercept officers, downed all 18 Betty bombers. Even had they managed to penetrate the defenses, the barrier of VTF fused anti-aircraft fire would have been insurmountable. The technical sophistication of the proximity fuse signified more than mere manufacturing superiority. It represented significant advancements in electronics, materials science, and systems integration that Japan was unable to replicate. The miniaturized vacuum tubes produced by Sylvania and Rathon utilized specialized glass formulations capable of enduring immense shock. The battery system, triggered by the force of firing, employed an electrolyte that remained stable for extended periods and activated instantaneously when required. The radio frequency was meticulously calculated to reduce interference while enhancing detection range. Each component reflected years of dedicated research supported by virtually limitless funding. In contrast, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses were still quite rudimentary. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, recognized as Japan's most advanced heavy AA weapon, continued to depend on mechanical time fuse that necessitated manual adjustment prior to each firing. Japanese naval forces at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato during her last mission, utilized anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically on par with what the Americans had deployed at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato confronted over 300 American aircraft, on April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns discharged thousands of rounds, yet managed to down fewer than 10 enemy planes. The Americans suffered the loss of only 10 aircraft while successfully sinking the largest battleship in the world, highlighting a significant technological gap. The introduction of the proximity fuse also facilitated new tactical strategies that were unachievable with traditional ammunition. American destroyers implemented the VT umbrella technique, launching proximity-fused shells in prearranged patterns above Allied vessels under assault. These shells would explode at designated distances, forming a protective barrier of shrapnel that kamikaze aircraft had to breach. This method was particularly effective against the fast-moving Oka flying bombs, which were nearly impossible to track using standard fire control but were susceptible to the shrapnel wall generated by VT patterns. Throughout the Okinawa campaign, from April 8th to June 22, 1945, the United States Navy utilized around 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. The results were indisputable. Although VT-fused ammunition constituted 45% of the heavy anti-aircraft munitions fired, it was responsible for the majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at extended ranges. In contrast, time-fused shells, which made up 55% of the total ammunition used, were primarily effective at close range where precision was less crucial. The calculations indicated that proximity fuses were roughly 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition in countering kamikaze assaults. The disparity in human costs was equally striking. Ships that depleted their VT ammunition and switched to time-fused shells experienced significantly higher casualty rates during subsequent assaults. The destroyer USS Drexler, which engaged after using up her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28th, was sunk in under a minute by 2 kamikaze aircraft that would likely have been neutralized by VT fire. The 158 fatalities aboard her represented more losses than many destroyers incurred throughout entire campaigns. While adequately supplied with proximity-fused ammunition, Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, personally faced the kamikaze threat when his flagship, the USS Indianapolis, was struck in March, necessitating his transfer to the USS New Mexico, which was also hit in May. He later remarked, "This is my second experience with a suicide plane hitting my own ship, and I have witnessed 4 other vessels being struck nearby. The suicide plane is an extremely effective weapon that we must not underestimate." However, Spruance also acknowledged that without proximity fuses, the kamikaze threat would have been far more catastrophic. The VT fuse has preserved countless ships and lives, serving as the dividing line between tolerable and intolerable losses. The strategic ramifications were evident to military strategists preparing for Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion of Japan. Intelligence assessments suggested that Japan had earmarked around 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze assaults against the invasion fleet. Nevertheless, American military planners, confident in the efficacy of proximity fuses, calculated that defensive needs could be adequately addressed. Production of VT fuses was projected to reach 100,000 units per day by September 1945. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses, featuring enhanced sensitivity and reliability, were entering mass production. The invasion fleet was expected to carry over 1 million proximity-fused shells, establishing an anti-aircraft defense unparalleled in military history. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 concluded the war before this pivotal test could take place. The influence of the proximity fuse on Japanese surrender calculations should not be overlooked. Japanese military evaluations obtained post-war recognized the futility of effectively defending against an invasion fleet shielded by what they referred to as electronic shells. Admiral Sumu Toyota, who served as the chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the conflict that the Japanese Navy had determined that homeland defense kamikaze attacks would yield less than a 10% success rate against proximity fuse defenses, a statistic that rendered the tactic militarily ineffective. Subsequent analysis after the war unveiled the comprehensive nature of the proximity fuse's success. The initiative had engaged 112 companies alongside the primary contractors, fostering an industrial ecosystem committed to producing the most advanced military electronics of that time. British scientists, who had initially developed the proximity fuse concept in 1940 but lacked the necessary resources for its advancement, acknowledged that American industrial capabilities had accomplished what they deemed impossible. The British had concluded that ensuring vacuum tubes could withstand gun launches was an insurmountable challenge. However, American engineers disproved this notion. The efficacy of the proximity fuse against kamikaze assaults significantly influenced military technology evolution for many years. The concept of smart munitions, which are weapons capable of autonomous decision-making, became a cornerstone of American military doctrine. Contemporary anti-aircraft missiles utilize proximity fusing derived from the VT fuse, while the close-in weapon system of the phalanx that safeguards modern warships operates on principles established during the defense against kamikaze attacks. The technological advantage that overcame human guidance through electronic intelligence established a framework that continues to influence military strategy. Japanese veterans interviewed after the war conveyed their ongoing astonishment at the capabilities of American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who played a pivotal role in the establishment of the Kamikaze program, acknowledged, "We were aware that the Americans possessed superior technology, yet the proximity fuse was something we could not have anticipated. Our pilots reported that shells detonated precisely where they were flying, as if directed by unseen forces. This not only devastated our aircraft, but also undermined the fundamental belief that spiritual strength could triumph over material shortcomings." Captain Ichiro Gio, an early proponent of kamikaze strategies, survived the war and later contemplated the impact of the proximity fuse. "We held the conviction that the willingness to sacrifice oneself would ensure victory. However, the American electronic fuse demonstrated that technology could prevail over even the most resolute human sacrifice. It was not merely a weapon. It was a commentary on the essence of contemporary warfare." The disparity between the proximity fuse and kamikaze assaults illustrated fundamentally divergent philosophies regarding the value of human life and the function of technology in combat. The American commitment to preserving life through advanced technology stood in stark contrast to the Japanese readiness to use life as a weapon. By rendering kamikaze attacks survivable for American forces, the proximity fuse invalidated the harsh rationale that compelled young Japanese men to choose death. In this regard, the electronic fuse symbolized not only technological dominance, but also a moral assertion about the conduct of warfare. The influence of the proximity fuse in countering kamikaze attacks transcends military history. The rapid development program that produced the VT fuse set a precedent for future American technological advancements, from the space program to modern computing. The partnership among universities, private industry, and military needs that resulted in the creation of 22 million advanced electronic devices under wartime constraints showcased American organizational prowess that would shape the post-war period. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the proximity fuse was refined, continued to serve as a hub for military technological innovation, developing a range of advancements from guided missiles to satellite navigation. Dr. Merle Tuve, who spearheaded the development of the proximity fuse, later reflected on this significant achievement. He stated, "We saved lives by enhancing the effectiveness of weapons. Each kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse represented American sailors returning home to their families, which justified any amount of effort and expenditure." The success of his team affirmed the American strategy of leveraging scientific knowledge to address military challenges, a philosophy that would prevail in defense strategies throughout the Cold War. For the Japanese, the ineffectiveness of kamikaze tactics against defenses equipped with proximity fuses signified the collapse of their beliefs in spiritual superiority, which had previously allowed them to overcome material disadvantages. The young pilots who perished in futile assaults against barriers of VT-fused explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but rather of military leadership that failed to acknowledge technological realities. The modern emphasis on technological advancement and innovation in Japan can be partially traced back to the harsh lessons learned in 1945 when electronic fuses triumphed over human pilots with mechanical precision. The mathematical accuracy of the proximity fuses, achieving 310 rounds per kill compared to 1,162 for time-fused shells, resulted in saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately strategic victory. Each VT fuse that operated correctly meant an American sailor returning home, a ship that survived to continue fighting, and evidence that technology could deliver a decisive advantage in contemporary warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before they could reach their targets represented thousands of American casualties averted, numerous ships saved, and validation of the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The narrative of technology overcoming fatalism reached its peak in the waters of Okinawa, where radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and advanced damage control systems triumphed over intentional suicide assaults. The kamikaze pilots, courageous young men, sacrificed for a futile cause, entered an electronic killing zone that their commanders had not foreseen. Their fatalities, while inflicting tactical damage that horrified American sailors, did not accomplish the strategic objective of rendering invasion costs intolerable. The proximity fuse had converted their sacrifice from a devastating weapon into a manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, encapsulated the contribution of the proximity fuse, stating that it has paved the way to Japan. Without the protection afforded by this ingenious device to the surface ships of the fleet, our westward advance could not have been as rapid, and the toll in personnel and vessels would have been significantly higher. This evaluation, shared by military leaders across the Pacific theater, acknowledged that electronic intelligence had triumphed over human sacrifice. The final tally was both sobering and conclusive. Throughout the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze assaults sank 36 American ships and inflicted damage on 368 others. Although these losses were severe, they represented the survival of the vast majority of the ships that were attacked, a survival rate that would have been unattainable without proximity fuses. The 4,970 American sailors who lost their lives to kamikazes at Okinawa, marking the Navy's bloodiest battle, constituted only a fraction of the casualties that conventional analysis had predicted in the absence of VT technology. In contrast, Japanese losses were total, with approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots lost in organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikusui operations, in addition to hundreds more in improvised suicide missions, achieving tactical outcomes that fell significantly short of strategic needs. The effectiveness of proximity fuses in countering kamikaze attacks illustrated that in contemporary warfare, technological dominance can surpass advantages in numbers, resolve, or even the willingness to sacrifice one's life. The American sailors operating 5-inch guns equipped with VT ammunition possessed a significant edge over Japanese pilots confined to cockpits for one-way missions. The miniaturized radio transmitter located in each shell's nose symbolized industrial capability, scientific expertise, and organizational efficiency that no amount of martial spirit could rival. When the electronic fuse encountered the human pilot in the skies above Okinawa, the result was predetermined by factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and the fundamental American conviction that technology could safeguard life while securing victory. The mathematical reality was unavoidable. A proximity fuse weighing under 5 pounds, containing 130 electronic components, produced for $18 by 1945, and operating for less than 30 seconds, could obliterate a kamikaze aircraft along with its pilot, representing years of training tons of aluminum and steel, and most tragically, human life that could never be replaced. When this was multiplied across thousands of confrontations throughout the Pacific theater, this equation translated into American triumph through technological superiority that significantly influenced the war's outcome. The success of proximity fuses against kamikaze attacks affirmed the entire American strategy for warfare in the 20th century. Investment in technology, confidence in industrial production, and the belief that superior equipment could overcome fanatical determination proved to be correct in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against proximity fuse defenses signified not only a military defeat but also a challenge to core beliefs regarding spirit prevailing over matter. The electronic fuse had triumphed over the divine wind, demonstrating that in the intense environment of modern warfare, advanced technology would prevail over human sacrifice. The Pacific War illustrated that in contemporary naval combat, the capability to eliminate aircraft from a distance was crucial for survival. Countries that were able to design, manufacture, and implement advanced defensive technologies possessed significant advantages over those that depended solely on human bravery. The comparison between the proximity fuse and kamikaze attacks exemplifies this principle at its core. American technological sophistication triumphed over Japanese human sacrifice. The success of the VT fuse at Okinawa established that technological superiority was the key determinant of military effectiveness. The differences between American and Japanese strategies for anti-aircraft defense ultimately narrate a broader tale about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations that could harness scientific knowledge, manufacturing prowess, and organizational skills to create superior military technology enjoyed overwhelming advantages. The proximity fuse epitomized American strengths. Innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military challenges. Its victory over the kamikaze attacks conclusively demonstrated that in modern warfare, success belonged to those who could conceive, construct, and deploy superior technology. The mathematical accuracy of the proximity fuse's effectiveness, 3 to 4 times more effective than traditional ammunition, resulted in a 73% reduction in the number of rounds needed per kill, preventing the loss of countless ships. This translated into a strategic victory that safeguarded American lives while overcoming a resolute enemy. This advantage, amplified across the extensive Pacific theater, contributed to securing American victory and established technological superiority as the cornerstone of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse not only defeated the kamikaze, but also validated the entire American approach to warfare through superior technology, definitively proving that in life-and-death situations, the quality of equipment could surpass the quantity of sacrifice.